January 29, 1945. Holtzheim, Belgium. You're standing in a frozen farmyard. Snow is falling. Your breath comes out in clouds. And 90 enemy soldiers are staring at you. Half of them are holding rifles pointed in your direction. The other half are bending down, picking up weapons from a pile on the ground. Your four buddies are on their knees in the snow, hands behind their heads, faces white with fear. An enemy officer steps forward. He shoves a submachine gun into your stomach, hard enough that you feel the metal through your coat. He's screaming at you. His face is red, veins bulging in his neck. You don't understand a word he's saying. The mathematics of this situation are simple. You're outnumbered 90-1. You're going to die in this farmyard. What do? If you're Leonard Funk, you start laughing. And then you kill 21 of them in 60 seconds. This isn't a movie. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy dreamed up by screenwriters. This actually happened. This is the true story of the most decorated American paratrooper of World War II, a 5'5", 140-pound former store clerk from Pennsylvania who became an absolute legend. A man who jumped into Normandy on D-Day and led 18 lost soldiers through 40 miles of enemy territory without losing a single one. A man who attacked 21 German soldiers with just 3 guys backing him up. A man who earned the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and a collection of foreign decorations that reads like a greatest hits album of military valor. And it all came down to one frozen moment in Belgium when Leonard Funk couldn't stop laughing. But before we get to that moment, before we talk about the 60 seconds of violence that changed everything, we need to understand who Leonard Funk was. Because this isn't just a story about killing 21 Germans in a farmyard. It's a story about what real courage looks like. And real courage doesn't always look the way you think it does. Real courage sometimes looks like a short guy from a steel town who never asked to be a hero. Let's start at the beginning. August 27, 1916. Braddock Township, Pennsylvania. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. entered the world in a place where life was hard and men were harder. This was steel country, the kind of place where smokestacks blotted out the sun and the Monongahela River ran dirty with industrial runoff. Just 8 miles east of Pittsburgh, Braddock Township was a working-class town where folks got up before dawn, worked in the mills until their hands bled, and went to bed exhausted. Lenny Funk grew up fast. He had to. His mother died when he was just a boy, leaving him to help raise his younger brother while his father worked long hours to keep food on the table. By the time Funk graduated high school in 1934, he'd already learned what responsibility meant. He understood sacrifice. He knew how to take care of people who depended on him. But 1934 was the worst possible time to be a young man looking for work. The Great Depression was in its 5th brutal year. 1 in 4 Americans couldn't find a job. College wasn't even a dream for most working-class kids. It was a fantasy reserved for the wealthy. Funk took whatever work he could find, eventually landing a job as a store clerk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and honest work mattered. For 7 years, that was Funk's life. Wake up, go to the store, help customers, go home. Week after week, month after month. A quiet, unremarkable existence for a quiet, unremarkable man. Then June 1941 rolled around. By June 1941, the world was on fire. Nazi Germany had conquered most of Europe. Poland, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, all fallen. England stood alone, enduring nightly bombing raids that turned London into an inferno. In the Pacific, Imperial Japan was carving out an empire in China and Southeast Asia with ruthless efficiency. The United States was still officially neutral, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Congress extended the draft. Funk's number came up. On reporting day, Leonard Funk walked into the induction center in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 24 years old, stood 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighed 140 pounds soaking wet. The Army examiner probably took one look at him and thought, "Supply clerk." They were wrong. Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. Now, to understand how crazy this was, you need to understand what paratroopers were in 1941. The concept was brand new to the American military. The idea was simple and insane. Load men into aircraft, fly them behind enemy lines, and have them jump out at 1,200 feet. They'd land surrounded by enemies with nothing but what they could carry on their backs. Most conventional soldiers thought it was suicide. Airborne training was designed to break you. 5 weeks of pure hell. Running until your legs gave out. Jumping, climbing, falling. Physical conditioning so brutal that half the candidates washed out. Men who'd been star athletes quit. Tough guys from rough neighborhoods cried and went home. Then came the towers, 40-foot platforms where they'd hook you to a cable and make you jump. Your body would scream at you to stop, to hold on, to not let go. But you had to let go. You had to trust the equipment. And then came the real thing. The first time you stepped to the door of a C-47 transport aircraft at 1,200 feet, every instinct you have tells you to grab the frame and hold on for dear life. The ground is impossibly far away. The wind tears at your face. Your parachute is just fabric and cord and faith. Men freeze in the door. Some have to be pushed out by the jumpmaster. But Funk didn't freeze. He jumped, earned his wings, got assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The 508th shipped to England in late 1943, where they joined the legendary 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans. Unlike Funk's unit, the 82nd were combat veterans. They'd already jumped into Sicily and Italy. They'd already killed Germans and watched their friends die. They were hard men who'd seen the elephant. Funk was the new guy. At 27 years old, he was ancient by paratrooper standards. Most of his squad mates were barely 20. But Funk had something those young warriors didn't have: maturity. Steadiness. The kind of quiet competence that made men trust you with their lives. His superiors noticed. By D-Day, Funk had been promoted to squad leader. By the time his war ended, he'd be acting company executive officer, a job usually held by a lieutenant or captain, not a sergeant. But first, he had to survive Normandy. June 6, 1944. 1:30 in the morning. Leonard Funk stood in the C-47 Skitran as it shuddered through the darkness over France. He was loaded down with 60 pounds of equipment: M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, ammunition, grenades, rations, medical kit, spare parachute. The plane was flying at just 400 feet, dangerously low, but the pilots had no choice. German anti-aircraft fire was everywhere. Through the small windows, Funk could see tracers arcing through the night sky like angry fireflies. Every few seconds, flak would explode near the formation, shaking the aircraft. The men could hear metal fragments pinging off the fuselage. One lucky shot and they'd all burn. The red light came on. 30 seconds. Funk checked his gear one last time. Around him, men crossed themselves and said silent prayers. Some kissed photos of their wives and girlfriends. Everyone was thinking the same thing. In a few moments, they'd be floating through the darkness over enemy territory. They'd land alone, surrounded by Germans who wanted them dead. Green light. Go! 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 The jump master slapped shoulders as paratroopers shuffled to the door and stepped out into the screaming wind. When Funk's turn came, he didn't hesitate. One step and he was falling, the prop blast hitting him like a fist. Then his chute deployed and the world went suddenly, eerily quiet. Below him, France. Occupied France. Enemy territory in every direction. The D-Day airborne operation was chaos from the start. German anti-aircraft fire had scattered the formations across 50 miles of French countryside. Paratroopers were landing in flooded fields and drowning under the weight of their equipment. Others came down in the middle of German camps and died before they could cut free of their harnesses. Some landed in trees and hung there helplessly while German soldiers shot them like targets at a carnival. Funk hit the ground hard. Pain exploded in his ankle, badly sprained, maybe fractured. Every step for the next 2 weeks would be agony. But he could walk and he could fight, and that was all that mattered. He was 40 miles from his drop zone. 40 miles of German-held territory. In the dark. Alone. For most men, that would have been the end. They'd hide in a barn or a ditch until the invasion passed them by. Not Funk. Within hours, he'd gathered a group of lost paratroopers, 18 men from different units, different companies, different regiments. Men who were scared and confused and looking for someone to tell them what to do. Funk told them. For 10 days, First Sergeant Leonard Funk led those 18 men through German-occupied territory. They moved at night, hid during the day, and fought when they had to. Despite his injured ankle, Funk insisted on serving as the lead scout, putting himself in the most dangerous position to protect his men. On June 17th, they linked up with Allied forces. Every single one of those 18 men survived. Not one casualty. 10 days behind enemy lines, 40 miles through hell, and Leonard Funk brought them all home. He received the Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration in the U.S. military. He also got a Bronze Star for meritorious service and his first Purple Heart. Leonard Funk was just getting started. September 17, 1944. The Netherlands. Operation Market Garden was the brainchild of British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and it was audacious to the point of recklessness. The plan: drop 35,000 British, American, and Polish paratroopers into Holland to capture a series of bridges across the Rhine. If it worked, the Allies would be in Germany by Christmas. The war would be over. It didn't work. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the furthest bridge. They ran straight into SS Panzer divisions that weren't supposed to be there. For 9 days, those British paratroopers fought and died in the streets of Arnhem. Only 2,000 of 10,000 men made it out alive. A bridge too far entered military history as a cautionary tale about hubris and bad planning. But Leonard Funk didn't know about the big picture. He only knew his mission: support the landings, secure the drop zones, kill Germans. Shortly after touching down near the town of Vauxhall, Holland, Funk noticed something that wasn't part of the plan. 3 German 20mm anti-aircraft guns were firing at incoming Allied gliders. Those gliders carried reinforcements, vehicles, artillery, ammunition, medical supplies. If those guns kept firing, hundreds of men would die before they even hit the ground. The German position was dug in on high ground. Approximately 20 soldiers manning the weapons and providing security. Sandbags, camouflage, interlocking fields of fire. A fortified position. Funk had 3 men with him. 3. Standard military doctrine says you need a 3-1 numerical advantage to assault a prepared defensive position. Funk had the exact opposite. He was outnumbered nearly 7-1. He attacked anyway. Leading from the front, Funk and his 3-man patrol charged the German position. They killed the security detachment, stormed the gun emplacements, and neutralized all 3 weapons and their crews. 20 Germans killed. Not one American casualty. The gliders landed safely. For this action, Leonard Funk received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor, 1 step below the Medal of Honor. Combined with his Silver Star from Normandy, Funk now had 2 of the rarest combat decorations in the American military. Most soldiers who earn even one of these medals are considered heroes for life. They write books, do lecture tours, get their names in the papers. Funk just kept fighting. December 16, 1944. Adolf Hitler was desperate. The Third Reich was collapsing. The Russians were coming from the east. The Americans and British were pushing from the west. Germany was being crushed between two unstoppable forces. Hitler gambled everything on one last throw of the dice. 3 German armies, 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks, 1,900 artillery pieces, crashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest. Hitler's plan was insane but almost worked. Split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, force a negotiated peace in the West so Germany could focus all its remaining strength on stopping the Soviets. The offensive hit thinly held sectors manned by green troops and exhausted veterans who'd been pulled off the line to rest. Entire divisions crumbled. Thousands of soldiers surrendered in the first hours. The German advance created a bulge 50 miles deep into Allied lines, giving the battle its name. By the time it was over, 89,000 Americans would be casualties. 19,000 would be dead. The weather made everything worse. Snow, ice, temperatures dropping well below zero. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Weapons jammed from the cold. Vehicle engines wouldn't start. The cold killed almost as many men as the Germans did. And then came Malmedy. December 17, 1944. One day into the offensive. A convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was moving south near the Bagnes crossroads when they ran into Kampfgruppe, an SS armored battle group spearheading the German attack. The Americans were rear echelon troops, artillery observers, radio operators, truck drivers. They weren't equipped or trained for combat against tanks and elite infantry. After a brief firefight, 113 Americans surrendered. They were herded into a farmer's field near the crossroads. Hands up. Disarmed. Prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Conventions. Then the SS opened fire. Machine guns. Pistols. Rifles. The Germans mowed them down like cattle. Men who tried to run were cut down by machine gun fire. Men who fell wounded were finished off with shots to the head. The SS soldiers walked through the field of bodies, shooting anyone who showed signs of life. 84 Americans died in that field. Some survived by playing dead, lying motionless in the snow with German boots walking past them, German voices laughing and joking. When darkness came, 43 survivors crawled away and made it back to American lines. The news spread through the American army like wildfire. The Germans were executing prisoners. The SS couldn't be trusted. The rules of war no longer applied. Before Malmedy, there had been an unspoken agreement between soldiers, even enemies. You fought hard, but when the situation became hopeless, you could surrender and expect to be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. Prisoners got food, medical care, and internment in POW camps until the war ended. After Malmedy, that agreement was dead. American soldiers swore they'd never surrender to the SS. Some units passed down unofficial orders: no SS prisoners. The Germans had changed the rules, and the Americans would play by those new rules. When Leonard Funk heard about the massacre, something hardened inside him. He'd already seen too much death in Normandy and Holland. Friends shot, blown apart, burned alive. But Malmedy was different. This was cold-blooded murder of men who'd surrendered in good faith. Leonard Funk decided that day that he would never surrender to Germans. No matter what. That decision would save his life and earn him the Medal of Honor. January 29, 1945. The Ardennes. The German offensive had been broken. Now the Allies were pushing back, retaking ground and hunting down pockets of resistance. Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment received orders to capture the Belgian village of Holzheim. There was a problem. Company C was under strength. The company executive officer, the second in command, had been killed in earlier fighting. They didn't have enough men for the assault. Funk, now serving as acting executive officer, looked at his depleted roster and made a decision. He walked to the company headquarters tent where clerks, supply personnel, and cooks were doing paperwork and preparing meals. "You're all infantry now," he told them. "Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." He formed these support personnel, 30 men who'd spent most of the war behind desks, into a makeshift combat platoon. Sure, they'd had basic training, but real combat? Most had never fired a shot at another human being. Most had never been under fire. They were paper pushers and potato peelers, not warriors. Funk didn't care. He needed bodies. He'd turn them into soldiers. The march to Holtzheim was 15 miles through waist-deep snow in a driving blizzard. Temperatures were well below freezing. German artillery shells exploded around them, harassing fire from the flanks. Men slipped and fell, struggled to their feet, kept marching. Their faces went numb. Their fingers lost feeling. Funk led from the front. They reached Holtzheim in the late afternoon. Funk organized the assault. His clerks and cooks followed him into the village. 15 houses with Germans in every one. Machine guns at windows. Rifles in doorways. Grenades flying. Funk and his makeshift warriors cleared them all. 30 prisoners captured. Not one American casualty. Other American units captured 50 more Germans on the other side of town, bringing the total to 80 prisoners. They were corralled in the yard of a farmhouse under guard. Funk looked at his exhausted men. They'd been marching and fighting for hours. There was still scattered resistance in other parts of the village, isolated German soldiers who hadn't surrendered yet. He could only spare 4 men to guard the 80 prisoners. "Keep them here," Funk told the guards. "We'll send reinforcements when we can." Then he headed back into the... While Funk was clearing the rest of Holtzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse where the prisoners were being held. 10 to 20 men wearing white camouflage capes over their uniforms. In the snow and confusion, they looked almost identical to American troops in winter gear. The 4 American guards didn't realize the danger until it was too late. The Germans overwhelmed them, disarmed them, forced them to their knees in the snow. Then they freed the 80 prisoners. 90 Germans total, 80 freed prisoners plus the patrol that liberated them. They grabbed weapons from the pile. They organized quickly. The German officer in charge, probably a lieutenant or captain, began giving orders, positioning his men for what they planned to do next. Attack Company C from the rear. Funk's company was scattered across the village, mopping up resistance. They weren't expecting an attack from behind. If 90 armed Germans hit them while they were spread out and vulnerable, it would be a massacre. The Americans would be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run. That's when Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse. Funk had come back to check on the prisoners. Routine stuff. Make sure the guards were okay. See if reinforcements had arrived yet. Standard procedure. He was not expecting to walk into 90 armed Germans. The scene was surreal. His 4 guards were on their knees in the snow, hands behind their heads. The prisoners who should have been unarmed and contained were standing everywhere with rifles in their hands, organizing for battle. The German officer spotted Funk immediately. The first sergeant stripes on Funk's sleeve marked him as a leader. The officer strode forward, shoved an MP-40 submachine gun into Funk's stomach, and screamed a command in German, "Surrender! Drop your weapon!" Except Funk didn't speak German. He had no idea what the officer was saying. The officer screamed again, louder, his face turning red, veins bulging in his neck. Funk looked around. 90 Germans. Half of them armed and ready. His 4 men disarmed and helpless. 1 other American soldier standing beside him, equally helpless. The mathematics of survival were zero. The sensible thing, the rational thing, was to surrender. Throw down his weapon, raise his hands, hope the Germans took him prisoner instead of shooting him on the spot. But Funk remembered Malmedy. 84 Americans murdered in a field. Shot like animals. Left to freeze in the snow. So instead of surrendering, Leonard Funk did something inexplicable. He started laughing. Nobody knows exactly why Funk laughed. Maybe it was a deliberate tactic to confuse the enemy and buy time. Maybe it was stress. The human brain does strange things when faced with certain death. Maybe it was genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. An officer screaming incomprehensibly, expecting compliance. Funk himself later said he tried to stop laughing but couldn't. Something about the Germans screaming in a language he couldn't understand just struck him as funny. Whatever the reason, the effect was devastating. The German officer screamed louder. Funk laughed harder, bending over, shoulders shaking. He called out to his men, "I don't understand what he's saying." Some of the German soldiers started laughing too. The whole scene was bizarre. Their officer was turning purple with rage, and this crazy American wouldn't stop cackling with a gun pressed against his stomach. Prisoners don't act like this. They beg. They plead. They comply. They don't stand there laughing while you hold them at gunpoint. For a few critical seconds, the German officer didn't know what to do. And Leonard Funk used those seconds. Still appearing to laugh, Funk slowly reached up toward his Thompson submachine gun slung over his shoulder. The German officer watched, relaxing slightly. The American was finally going to surrender his weapon. Funk's hand closed around the grip of the Thompson. He began to unsling it slowly, carefully, like a man giving up. Then he moved. In one motion, faster than thought, Funk swung the Thompson down and brought the muzzle into line. He squeezed the trigger. The M1A1 Thompson fired .45 ACP rounds at 600 rounds per minute. At close range, each round hit like a sledgehammer. They didn't just wound, they destroyed flesh, shattered bone, turned human beings into broken things. The first burst caught the German officer in the chest. 30 rounds in less than 3 seconds. The officer was dead before he hit the ground. Funk didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The moment he started shooting, he committed to killing everyone or dying himself. There was no middle ground. He pivoted, still firing. The Thompson sprayed an arc of lead across the German soldiers nearest to him. Men screamed. Men fell. Blood sprayed across the white snow. Brass casings tumbled through the air, steaming in the cold. The magazine ran dry. 30 rounds gone in seconds. This was the critical moment. A Thompson takes about 2 seconds to reload if you're good at it. 2 seconds is an eternity in a firefight. 2 seconds is enough time for 90 Germans to kill one American. Funk yanked the empty magazine out, slammed a fresh one in, racked the bolt, and kept shooting. The whole sequence took less than a heartbeat. Muscle memory. Thousands of hours of training compressed into one fluid motion. At the same time, he was screaming at his men, "Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 guards, still on their knees, scrambled for the rifles the dead Germans had dropped. Seconds ago they were prisoners. Now they were fighting for their lives. The Germans were in chaos. Their officer was dead. The American who'd been laughing was now killing them. Nobody had given orders for this. Nobody knew what to do. Some Germans shot back. Bullets cracked past Funk's head, close enough to feel the wind. One round killed the American soldier standing beside him, a man whose name history didn't record. Funk kept firing, moving, killing. His guards had weapons now and they were shooting too. The Germans found themselves caught in a crossfire they never expected. 60 seconds. That's all it took. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the snow. 24 more were wounded, bleeding, crying for help. The rest, more than 40 men, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The prisoners were prisoners again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of the carnage, smoke rising from his Thompson, surrounded by bodies and blood and spent brass casings. "That," he said to his men, "was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." The story spread through the 82nd Airborne like wildfire. The sergeant who laughed at 90 Germans and killed 21 of them with a Tommy gun. The man who should have died but didn't. When the Medal of Honor recommendation reached Washington, nobody questioned it. What Funk did at Holtzheim was beyond dispute. Outnumbered 90-1, enemy weapon in his gut, facing almost certain death, he attacked instead of surrendering. The official citation reads, "He was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach." Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder and then, with lightning motion, brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer. He turned upon the other Germans, firing and shouting to the other Americans to seize the enemy's weapons. September 5, 1945. The White House. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Leonard Funk's neck. According to witnesses, Truman said, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in the world, the man who had just ended World War II by authorizing the use of atomic weapons, looking at a 5'5" former store clerk from Pennsylvania and saying, "I'd rather be you." Let's count what Leonard Funk earned during World War II. Medal of Honor for Holtzheim. Distinguished Service Cross for the anti-aircraft guns in Holland. Silver Star for leading 18 men through 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy. Bronze Star for meritorious service. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Wounded 3 separate times and kept fighting. Foreign decorations from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The Croix de Guerre, the Order of Leopold, the Military Order of William, the Dutch equivalent of the Victoria Cross. Leonard Funk was the most decorated American paratrooper of World War II. The war ended. Funk went home. He didn't write a book. Didn't do the lecture circuit. Didn't turn his Medal of Honor into a speaking career or political platform. He didn't cash in on his fame. He went back to Pennsylvania and got a job with the Veterans Administration. For 27 years, Leonard Funk worked at the VA helping other veterans navigate bureaucracy, process disability claims, and cut through red tape. The same kind of clerk work he did before the war. The same quiet, unglamorous, necessary work. He rose through the ranks to become division chief of the Pittsburgh Regional Office. Good salary. Steady hours. A pension waiting at the end. His wife Gertrude stuck with him through all of it. They had 2 daughters and lived in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a working-class neighborhood in a working-class town, not far from where he grew up. The Medal of Honor hung in a case somewhere, along with all his other decorations. He never talked about them. When people asked about Holtzheim, about the laughing about the 90 Germans, he'd shrug it off. Did what I had to do. That was it. That was all he'd ever say. November 20th, 1992. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. died of cancer at age 76. They buried him at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 35, grave 2373-4, among the heroes of every American war. At the time of his death, he was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II. A fitness center at Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, is named after him. A highway in Pennsylvania bears his name. A post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him in 2023. But most people have never heard of Leonard Funk. They know Audie Murphy. They know Alvin York, the famous Medal of Honor recipients whose stories became movies and legends. They don't know the short, quiet paratrooper who laughed at 90 Germans and lived to tell about it. War doesn't favor the big. It doesn't favor the strong. It doesn't favor the reckless or the fearless. War favors the ones who keep thinking when everyone else has stopped. At Holtzheim, Leonard Funk had every reason to surrender. The math was impossible, 90 against 1. A gun pressed against his stomach. His men already captured. Any rational person would have given up. But Funk wasn't just thinking about the math. He was thinking about Malmedy, about 84 Americans murdered after they surrendered. He was thinking about what would happen to his men if he gave up. He was thinking about Company C, scattered across the village, vulnerable to attack from behind if these Germans escaped. So he laughed, maybe as a tactic, maybe from stress, maybe because the absurdity of the situation struck him as darkly funny. And while the German officer was confused, while everyone was off balance, Leonard Funk made his move. 60 seconds later, he was alive when he should have been dead. 21 enemy soldiers were dead when they should have been victorious. That's what courage looks like. Not size. Not strength. Not training. Courage is what you do when there's a gun in your stomach and 90 men want you dead. Courage is laughing at death and pulling the trigger anyway. Courage is Leonard Funk standing in a farmyard in Belgium, surrounded by bodies, and saying, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." Because even in his moment of greatest triumph, he knew how close he'd come to dying. Harry Truman understood this. That's why he told Funk he'd rather have the Medal of Honor than be president. Because being president is about politics and power and making deals. The Medal of Honor is about standing up when every instinct tells you to fall down. It's about protecting your men when the smart play is to save yourself. It's about 60 seconds of pure courage that changes everything. Leonard Funk had that courage. And then, when the war was over, he went back to being a clerk. Because that's what heroes do. They don't seek glory. They do what needs to be done, and then they go home and live their lives. The next time you think courage requires being big, being strong, being fearless, remember the 5'5" man from Pennsylvania who laughed in the face of death and won. Remember Leonard Funk. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is laugh when the world says you should cry. And remember that true heroism isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing the right thing when it matters most, and then going home to help your fellow veterans file their paperwork. That's the lesson of Leonard Funk's life. Not just the 60 seconds of violence in a Belgian farmyard, but the 27 years of quiet service that followed. Both mattered. Both were heroic. Because courage isn't just about what you do in war. It's about who you are when the fighting's over.